She knows the Ashenmoor codes, the voice said, barely above a breath. All of them. Her mother died before she could pass them on, but the daughter memorized her journals. Every cipher, every route, every name the old king never made public. The girl's been in a beast compound for 3 years, which is exactly why no one thought to ask her. The chain snapped taut, and Tala planted her feet in the mud before the force of it could pull her sideways. Ashbane weighed 900 pounds on his lightest day. When he was terrified, and he was terrified now, every muscle in his massive body locked against the iron collar. He weighed considerably more, not in any physical sense that could be measured, but in the way a thing made dense by suffering becomes impossible to move. She held the lead, both hands raw and bleeding where the rope had stripped her palms twice already. The crowd around the stone pit had gone quiet in the way crowds go quiet when they expect to see someone die. The compound master, a wide-shouldered man named Ulder, stood at the rail above her with his arms crossed. He had a face that had never needed to be kind, and it showed. Ulder's entire operation, 40 Omegas, 60 beasts, a business built on spectacle, ran on the principle that pain was the only language the Unchosen understood. "You've got until I finish this pipe," Ulder said, tapping ash off a clay stem. "Then I pull the collar lever and let him drag you into the wall." The crowd paid to see something interesting, and frankly, so did I. Tala did not look at him. She looked at Ashbane. She had been looking at Ashbane, nothing but Ashbane for the last 6 minutes, and what she saw wasn't fury. It was the look of an animal that had stopped believing it would survive the next hour. They had strung him up in the testing harness before dawn. That was Ulder's method for war wolves that wouldn't submit. Restrain them, run noise and fire past them for hours, wait until the animal's nervous system cracked under the stimulation, and then step in as the thing that made it stop. The theory was that the beast would associate relief with human command. The theory worked on animals that didn't understand what was happening to them. Ashbane understood. He had been the old king's battle wolf, bonded to a commander killed 4 months ago when the Eastern Coalition overran the Fenmark garrison. Since then he'd been resold 3 times, each time growing more violent, until he ended up here, in Ulder's stone pit, surrounded by people who smelled like cruelty and tasted like a trap. He didn't want to be aggressive, he wanted to die. Tala pressed her hand flat against the side of his neck, right below the iron collar. She could feel his pulse there, fast, irregular, the rhythm of something coming apart. The crowd murmured. Someone near the far rail told someone else to get back. She leaned her forehead against his jaw and kept her voice below audible. Just breath, shaped into meaning. "I know what they did. I know how long it's been since someone touched you without hurting you first. You don't have to trust me. You don't have to trust anyone. But you can breathe." She exhaled slowly, deliberately. Like that. One more. Just one. The shaking in his shoulders slowed. Not stopped, but slowed. His ears, flattened so hard against his skull they'd looked fused to it, rotated, barely, 1 degree, toward the sound of her voice. Tala kept breathing. She was still breathing when the crowd stopped murmuring entirely. The silence was different from the one before. That silence had been anticipatory, bright with the particular excitement of watching someone fail. This silence had a different texture. Careful, the way air goes still before a significant thing happens. She felt the change in pressure before she smelled anything, then the scent reached her. Cold stone and iron, and something beneath it, ancient and fixed, like the ground before a winter freeze, and she understood why every person in the compound had stopped moving. Ashbane's head lifted. He was looking at something over her shoulder. The Alpha King of the Ashenvale Compact had arrived to inspect Ulder's war wolves, and he had walked into the stone pit without announcing himself, without sending heralds, without doing any of the things a king was supposed to do to give lesser people time to compose themselves. He stood 12 feet behind her, She didn't turn around. She couldn't. Ashbane was watching him with his full attention now, and if she broke the thread of contact between them, the wolf would startle and someone would get hurt. But she could hear boots on wet stone 4 strides stopped. The silence became absolute. Ulder's voice came from above, strangled with the effort of speaking through a suddenly dry throat. Your Highness, we weren't expecting, that is, we would have prepared. The king did not respond to Ulder. Whose Omega is that? He said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It landed the way sound lands in a space where other sound has stopped existing. Tala kept her hand on Ashbane's neck, kept breathing. She felt the wolf's heartbeat under her palm gradually find a slower rhythm. She belongs to the compound, Your Highness, Ulder said. Purchased 3 years ago. She's a handler good with the difficult ones. What did she cost? A pause. Ulder cleared his throat. 14 copper pieces and a sack of barley flour. Something shifted behind her, a weight redistributed, and then the king's voice came again, closer this time. What is her name? Ulder hesitated in the particular way a person hesitates when they realize they don't know the answer to a question they should know. We call her T, the handlers use shortened. I asked what her name is. Tala answered because no one else was going to. Tala. She still didn't turn around. Ashbane's ears were forward now, his breathing deepened. My name is Tala. The king went quiet. It wasn't the quiet of someone with nothing to say. It was the quiet of someone processing a piece of information that had rearranged something in them. He stepped around her. She saw him now, couldn't avoid it. He was built the way old war stories are built. Every detail too precise to have been invented, tall enough that the rain seemed to fall differently around him. A scar across his left cheekbone, long-healed, that pulled the edge of his expression into something that read different depending on the angle. His eyes were the particular grey of clouds before a storm, not dark, not light, color that existed only in the moment before something broke. His name was Wraith, king of the Ashenvale Compact. 5 years of unbroken campaign, 3 territories absorbed, a court that had not seen him smile in longer than anyone could remember. His wolf had been rumored silent since the Fenmark disaster, since he'd lost his advance unit to an ambush he hadn't predicted and couldn't stop. He looked at Tala the way a person looks at something they recognize from a dream. Then he looked at Ashbane. Ashbane looked back. He didn't lower his head. He didn't bare his teeth. He stood behind Tala's shoulder with his chin level and his eyes steady and his massive body absolutely, deliberately still. Wraith reached into his coat. He pulled out a leather purse, held it out to one side without looking at Ulder. What is the wolf worth? Ulder named a figure. It was outrageous. Wraith's expression didn't change. He dropped the purse. A soldier materialized from somewhere and caught it. I want both of them. Tala rode in the supply wagon because there was nowhere else to put her. Ashbane walked alongside it on a lead so long, it was essentially a suggestion. He didn't need the lead. He stayed within 6 feet of the wagon, regardless of terrain, had since the first hour of the march, when he'd planted himself at her position and declined to move anywhere else. The soldiers called him the Grey Shadow, which Tala found both reasonable and slightly less than the wolf deserved. On the 3rd night, when the camp settled into the particular stillness of an army that has marched long enough to stop making unnecessary noise, she sat on the wagon's back rail with her feet hanging over the edge, and she talked. She talked because she had to. Not from loneliness. She'd trained herself out of that need years ago, but because her mind didn't stop and it needed somewhere to put what it collected, and there was no one she trusted with any of it. 42 mounted soldiers, she said, low enough that it was barely sound. Ashbane's ears tracked toward her. 8 supply wagons with a 3-day ration surplus, which means either they don't plan to stay long or they expect to take losses. The king rides point without a close guard, which isn't arrogance. Look at how the column moves when he stops. Tighter, faster, everyone readjusting to his position. They're not protecting him because they know he doesn't need it. He's protecting them by being visible. Ashbane shifted his weight, settling. The eastern flank has a scout rotation gap, she continued. Every 4 hours between shifts, there are 11 minutes where the ridge approach goes unwatched. I've measured it against the cook fire cycles. She paused. The supply sergeant skims the grain count every time the company commander isn't looking. It's consistent enough to be habit, which means it's been sanctioned higher up. The wolf exhaled, a long, slow breath that smelled of pine and cold earth. I know, Tala said, I know. She had been doing this for 3 years at the compound, cataloguing everything, telling no one, giving the words to Ashbane because the alternative was letting them collect inside her until something cracked. She'd been sold for 14 copper pieces and a sack of flour by a pack elder who'd told her that her tendency to analyze things was a defect, that real Omegas felt, not calculated, that a wolf who observed instead of submitted was a broken wolf. She'd kept her wolf almost entirely hidden since she was 13. It didn't hum like a normal Omega wolf. It ran cold and precise, like something measuring rather than feeling. The pack elder had called it wrong. She'd started to believe him. She was still talking on the 9th night when the king came around the corner of the supply wagon and stopped. Tala went completely still. Ashbane did not move a muscle. His eyes tracked to Wraith, then back to Tala, and then he lowered his head slightly, not in submission, in something closer to acknowledgement. Wraith looked at the wolf, looked at Tala. Something passed behind his expression she couldn't name. How long, he said. How long have I been doing this, or how long have you been listening? Both. She kept her voice level. 3 years of doing it. I don't know how long you've been listening. My scouts flagged you on the 2nd night. He stepped closer. The lamplight from the nearest tent caught the line of his scar, the set of his jaw. They thought you were singing to keep the wolf calm. I wasn't singing. No. He stopped 4 feet from her. His expression was not what she'd braced for. It wasn't suspicion. It wasn't contempt. It was the specific attention of someone whose thinking has just been interrupted by a more interesting thought. You were running tactical analysis on my column. The blood left her face. She felt it happen, the drop, the cold. Don't apologize, he said before she could speak. Don't explain. I'm not here for that. He crossed his arms. Tell me what you found. Her mouth stayed shut. Tala. His voice dropped. Just her name, 2 syllables, flat and specific, carrying a weight she wasn't prepared for. Tell me what you found. All of it. She told him. She couldn't stop herself once she started. It was like uncorking something that had been sealed too long. She told him about the eastern flank gap, the supply sergeant, the scout rotation. She told him about the cook fire timing and what it revealed about the chain of command. She told him about the ridge approach, the places where a flanking force of 50 could make his column vulnerable. The supply line they were counting on, that was one bad river crossing away from failing. She talked for 37 minutes. Wraith didn't interrupt once. When she stopped, the silence had a different quality than the one before, denser, the kind that follows a significant thing. Where did you learn this? His voice was low. My mother was an intelligence analyst for the old king. She kept her eyes level. She died when I was 15, but she'd been teaching me since I could read. The old king's intelligence corps was disbanded after Fenmark, Wraith said slowly. Destroyed, Tala corrected. Not disbanded. Someone wanted what they knew gone, including my mother's work. She stopped, including my mother. The lamp flame bent in the breeze. Ashbane behind her was absolutely still. Wraith stepped closer. He reached out. She flinched, couldn't help it, 3 years of compound reflexes. And his hand stopped, suspended in the air between them. Then Carefully, deliberately, he pressed 2 fingers against the cut on her temple. She had reopened it that morning on a wagon slat. He had apparently noticed. The touch sent a shock through her. Not pain, something else entirely. Something that made her wolf press against the inside of her chest so hard she had to breathe through it. His jaw worked. The storm-grey eyes dropped to his fingertips, where her blood had transferred in a smear barely visible in the dark. "My wolf has been silent since Fenmark," he said, "since I lost my advance unit to an ambush I should have seen coming." His voice didn't break, but it flattened in a way that told her it was costing him not to. "I stopped hearing him about a week after the battle. I thought he was punishing me. Now I think he was ashamed of the same thing I was ashamed of. We both failed to read what was in front of us." Tala's wolf was pressing so hard against her ribs, her vision was dimming at the edges. "He's not silent now," she said. She could hear it, the low, subaudible thrum that an alpha's wolf made when it surfaced. She had always been able to hear things she wasn't supposed to hear. Right now, he's very loud. Wraith looked at her for a long moment. "I know," he said. "He's saying your name." Alder had been selling information to the Eastern Coalition for 2 years. Tala knew this by the time Ashbane caught the courier, a young soldier who'd been slipping dispatches out of the camp inside his boot lining, discovered only because the wolf had tracked him 300 yards through the dark and cornered him against a supply cart with the quiet efficiency of something born for exactly this kind of work. She brought the decoded messages to Wraith at midnight. She didn't knock. She just walked in because she had learned over the past 2 weeks that the king's tent was the one place in the camp where she was allowed to simply exist. "Alder's been routing Eastern Coalition scouts through his compound," she said. "Every warwolf he sold in the last year was fitted with a position tracker embedded in the collar weld, including Ashbane." Wraith was already removing the collar before she finished the sentence. He had a blade out, handled it with the precision of someone who knew exactly how close he could cut to an animal's neck without causing harm. Ashbane stood perfectly still. "They would have used him to track our position," Wraith said. "Yes, but Alder didn't know I'd come with him." She spread the decoded dispatches across his table. "These mention me by name, the Miravel girl." My mother's name was Miravel. She touched the edge of one page. "They've been looking for me for 3 years, because my mother had a ledger. Names of everyone involved in the Fenmark intelligence failure. The officers who sold position data to the Coalition, the couriers who moved it, the commanders who looked the other way." She paused. "She gave it to me the night before she died. I memorized it." Wraith stared at her. "I memorize everything," she said. "I always have." He stood. The table didn't move, but the room seemed to shift around him. He crossed to her in 3 strides, and then he stopped, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, close enough that her wolf stopped pressing against her ribs and simply went quiet, the way a flame goes still in the instant before a wind comes from the wrong direction. 14 copper pieces, he said. His voice was wrecked, and a sack of barley flour. Alder drove a hard bargain. Alder is going to answer for it. She looked up at him. "Not yet. You still have a war to finish." Something that wasn't quite a smile moved across the scarred side of his face. The first one she'd seen. It didn't make him look softer. It made him look like something had cracked open in the stone of him and was letting light through. "After," he said, then Alder. "After," she agreed. The battle at the Ashenford crossing happened 3 days later. Tala was not allowed on the field. Wraith had been completely unmovable on this point. The argument had lasted 20 minutes, both of them standing across his strategy table, his wolf and hers pressing against the inside of their respective ribs like opposing weather fronts. "You planned it," he'd said. "You don't need to be standing in it." She'd told him about the ridge approach. He'd listened. He'd repositioned the eastern flank, closed the rotation gap, recalled the supply sergeant for a very specific conversation. He'd arranged the advance exactly the way she'd laid it out. A feint to the north to draw the coalition's lead force, a hold at the river crossing to cut their supply column, a reserve hidden in the eastern tree line for the force that would try to circle. She sat on the hill above the valley, with Ashbane beside her, and watched. It worked until it didn't. The coalition's southern commander didn't take the bait. He pulled back entirely, let the northern feint land on empty ground, and sent a flanking force through the dry creek bed that Tala had identified as a vulnerability, but hadn't flagged as immediately active. The creek bed required a team that knew the terrain intimately. Apparently someone did. 300 coalition wolves, moving through the tree line toward the reserve position from behind. Tala watched them for approximately 4 seconds, then she turned to Ashbane. The wolf was already looking at her. She had asked Ashbane exactly once to trust her in a stone pit where he'd had every reason to trust no one. He had. She didn't think that debt had an expiration date. "I know what I'm asking," she said. "I know it's fast terrain, and I've never ridden at speed, and you could leave me here and be completely justified." She gripped his neck with both hands. "But there's a reserve force that doesn't know they're about to be hit from behind, and your old rider would not have watched that happen." Ashbane lowered himself. Not all the way. He was a war-wolf, not a horse, and there was a limit to the geometry, but enough that she could get onto his back. She'd seen how it was done. She'd memorized the weight distribution, the grip points, the way a rider had to move with the animal rather than against it. She swung up. The sound Ashbane made wasn't a growl, it was something older than a growl. A sound for the specific moment when a wolf finds a person worth carrying into danger. They came down the hill at a speed that emptied her mind of everything except the next second. The trees blurred. The noise of the battle grew and then separated into individual threads, metal and voice and the particular wet sound of a fight happening in enclosed ground. She felt Ashbane's muscles reading the terrain beneath her and adjusting before she could think to ask. She hit the reserve line screaming, flanking force, dry creek bed, southeast, 200 yards, 300 wolves, move now. The reserve commander, a silver-haired woman named Syra who'd been fighting longer than Tala had been alive, looked at the omega on the back of the king's supposedly unrideable war-wolf and made a decision in under 2 seconds. She didn't ask for credentials. She didn't ask for verification. She turned her wolves and met the flanking force in the trees. The ambush failed before it reached the reserve position. Tala sat on the hillside afterward, her hands shaking so hard she couldn't grip anything, Ashbane's flank warm and steady against her back. The cut on her temple had reopened, the same one, the same place, for the 3rd time, and she could feel blood tracking down the side of her face in a line she was too tired to wipe away. She heard Wraith before she saw him. Not his footsteps. His heartbeat through the mate bond that had been pulling tight and tighter since the first night she'd made him listen. She could feel it in her chest like a second pulse, specific and certain as a name. He came over the ridge at a run. He was covered in the aftermath of the battle, mud and blood, and the dust that rises from a field where wolves have shifted and fought and shifted back. His coat was slashed across one shoulder. His eyes found her from 40 yards away and did not look anywhere else. He dropped to one knee in front of her and put both hands on her face. Battle-rue palms, warm, shaking slightly in the particular way that isn't fear, but is the thing that lives in the same room as fear. "I told you," he said, "I didn't want to see you bleeding again. It's the same cut. Technically, it doesn't count." "It counts." His thumb moved against her temple. His eyes closed for 1 second, opened, storm grey and burning, the storm finally breaking open. "You rode him." "He let me." "Nobody." I asked instead of demanding. She held his gaze. "He's been waiting for someone who would do that." Something came apart behind his expression, not gently, The way something comes apart that's been held under pressure for too long. His forehead dropped against hers, and he breathed. 1 breath, 2, and she could feel his wolf through the bond, enormous and present, and saying her name in a register below language. "The Mirabelle ledger," he said, low and rough. "You said you memorized it." "Yes." "Alda's name is in it." "Yes." "Then we go to Alda." He pulled back far enough to see her face. Something settled in his jaw. Not peace, something harder and more permanent than peace. Certainty. And you decide what happens to him. Alda's compound looked smaller than it had 3 years ago. Tighter. The stone walls had never been impressive, but Tala didn't remember until now how close the buildings leaned together, how little sky they left between them. Wraith's column filled the yard like water filling a cup. Alda stood in the entrance to his main hall with 6 men at his back, and the particular stillness of someone running calculations they already know the answer to. He looked at the army. He looked at Wraith. He looked at Tala on Ashbane's back at the column's front, wearing a leather coat and her mother's cipher ring on her right hand. The ring she'd retrieved from the ledger box locked in Alda's cellar for 3 years. What moved across his face in the moment before his mask went back on? She saw it. She had always seen things clearly that others missed. It wasn't anger. It wasn't defiance. It was the expression of a man watching the last domino fall and knowing he'd placed the first one himself. "The ledger," Wraith said, dismounting, "names you as the coalition courier who provided position data before the Fenmark garrison fell. The intelligence failure that cost 47 lives. I have no idea what." "You sold this woman," Wraith said, "for 14 copper pieces and a sack of barley flour." While knowing exactly what she was and what she carried, he stopped at the compound gate. He didn't go farther. He looked back at Tala. The decision was hers, he'd said that. She rode Ashbane through the gate, through the yard, stopping where she could look down at Alda. The compound hands watched from doorways. The crowd that had gathered along the outer wall was silent. "The ledger goes to the Crown Tribunal," she said. "Your compound rolls, every wolf sold, every traceable collar, go to Wraith's intelligence office." She looked at the man who had decided, when she was 17, that her mind was a defect worth 14 copper pieces. "You will live long enough to see every name on that ledger face charges, and you will spend that time knowing that the girl you sold for flour is the reason it happened." Alda's mouth worked. Nothing came out. "Take him," Wraith said, and it was done. The marking ceremony happened that night in the compound's main hall. Tala had chosen it, the same room where Alda had called her observations unwanted and signed her sale papers, the same stone floor, the same lamp brackets, the same low ceiling that had made her feel buried every single day she'd worked here. Now the room held 60 of Wraith's soldiers, his generals, Syra, with her nicked sword and her expression of someone who had revised a prior judgment and was entirely at peace with the revision. Ashbane was tied outside. He had stamped 1 foot against the gate post, steady, deliberate, the sound carrying through the walls like a pulse keeping time. Wraith stood before her in the firelight, and his wolf was present in a way it hadn't been in 5 years, not hidden, not leashed, standing inside him the way a shadow stands inside its owner. He spoke first, as was custom, his voice carried without being raised. "I spent 5 years winning a war I couldn't figure out how to stop losing," he said. "I had territory and soldiers and the best commanders on the continent, and something kept bleeding through every formation I built. Ambushes I couldn't predict, betrayals I couldn't see." His eyes found hers. She looked at my column for 3 nights and told me things my intelligence apparatus had missed for a year. She did it while whispering in the dark to a werewolf who wouldn't let anyone else near him. Something shifted in his expression, not the ghost of a smile she'd seen once before. Something deeper, something that had come all the way up from whatever quiet place his wolf had been living in. My wolf said her name for the first time since Fenmark. I am claiming her as my equal in counsel and in everything else, and I would like anyone with a problem with that to come explain it to me personally." He paused one beat. "The wolf is also available for consultation." Someone near the back laughed, then more people. Then the sound filled the room in the way warmth fills a space that has been cold too long. Tala breathed through it. She had planned what she would say, and now all of it had gone, and what was left was simpler and truer anyway. "I was told the way my mind worked was broken," she said. "That real Omegas didn't think the way I thought. That calculating instead of feeling made me a defect." She kept her voice even. "I believed it for a long time. It's easy to believe when everyone around you is saying the same thing." She looked at Wraith, at his scarred face, and his storm-grey eyes, and the wolf she could feel through the bond, warm and enormous and fixed on her like a compass needle finding north. "He gave me a table and a lamp and asked me to show him what I saw. He didn't treat my knowing as something to be managed. He corrected his missions." She steadied. "That's not a rescue, that's a partnership, and that's what I'm choosing." Outside, Ashbane stamped once. The bond sealed when Wraith's mark landed, not gently, not violently, but with the specific certainty of something finding the exact place it was always meant to be. She felt the thread between them draw taut and hold. She felt his wolf settle against the inside of her chest like something that had been traveling a long time and had finally stopped. She pressed her hand to his heart, felt it beat, steady, unhurried, completely sure. "Mine," he said against her ear, "not a claim, a fact, the way gravity is a fact, the way north is a fact." "Yours," she said, and she meant it the way you mean a thing you've always known without ever having a word for it. Outside the compound gate, Ashbane made no sound at all. He had been still since the moment the mark landed, the way he went still when something was exactly right. In the morning they would ride for the capital, and there would be more work ahead. The tribunal, the long, slow process of accountability, a war that needed finishing with maps instead of blood. Tala would be at the strategy table for all of it. But in the morning, tonight she stood in the room where someone had decided her worth in copper and flour, and she let herself feel the full distance between that moment and this one, not with anger, with the particular satisfaction of a map finally corrected, every terrain feature placed where it actually was, every path accounted for. She had always been good at maps.